All right, so today on Passion to Poison, we have Annette Browser. And I first met Annette a couple years ago. I didn't know much about her, but I had a conversation with her, I think it was last year, and she told me about a condition that she has. And let me look at my notes here. I want to make sure I say this correctly. She has something called Task-Specific Focal Dystonia. And I had never heard of it before. And I was kind of blown away that this is actually a real thing. And I thought it was fascinating, and talked to Mac, and we wanted to get her on here because it's like the perfect life transition story.
Okay. Well, I'd like to start at the beginning because I think it can help to explain the enthusiasm that I had for the violin, that I have for the violin, present or past. It's hard to decide. From a young age, I always liked to try new things, and my parents were extremely supportive. And my mother did classical ballet, as did my dad after a period of time. That's a whole nother story. But by the time I was 3 years old, I was taking ballet class, and that continued on into jazz and tap. When I was 7, I asked my mom for voice lessons. She said I was too young. When I was 9, she asked if I wanted to take piano lessons, and I said sure, thinking how satisfying that would be if I practiced and became better than my sister. When I was 10, I joined a hockey team, and then came the moment in my life that I didn't know I was waiting for necessarily. Violin class. 5th grade, everybody was required to play the violin. I had never seen one before. I had, I'm sure, heard one, but didn't know I was hearing one. And it was just the most beautiful, most fascinating thing I had ever seen or heard in my short life. And I had arrogantly looked at all these other activities and thought, yeah, I could do that. But I looked at the violin and I thought, I got to know more about this. I'm going to need a teacher. This is incredible. And I was in a group class, and not everybody practiced. I did. And one day the teacher approached me and suggested that maybe I take private violin lessons. And I thought that was a fantastic idea, because then I'd have a teacher all to myself, and I wouldn't have to wait around for a group class, to get their act together. So I went home and I told my mom, I said, Mom, I got to have these private violin lessons. And she said, when are you going to have time for that? Because you're doing this and this and this and this and this. And she said, you have to practice for 30 minutes a day. I said, no problem. Without instruction, I went into my room. I got a piece of paper. I divided that piece of paper into 7 days of the week, and each day into 15-minute increments. And I scheduled everything from piano to dance, church, homework, sleeping, eating, playing with friends, absolutely everything, because I had to convince my parents. I had to build a case. And so I took that schedule, that piece of paper, and I took it and I slapped it down on the kitchen counter, and I pointed it at it and I said, that's how I'm going to do it. And my mother looked at that list and she said, okay. And that's where it started. I loved the violin. I even like to practice. Somehow, even from a young age, I knew that to learn it, I had to practice it. So fast forward through years of youth orchestras and lessons, I had never planned to be a music major in college. But I got halfway through college and I really needed to get out because I didn't think my parents were just going to pay for it forever. I had wandered through various majors, and I all along had taken lessons and been in the orchestra for the fun of it. And I never wanted to be a music major because I thought it would take all the fun out of it. And it did. But it was my quickest way out of school. So I auditioned, I switched to a music major, I was accepted. I got out of there. I finished college in 5 years due to the scenic route. And I was really very interested in teaching. Originally, I was going to be a kindergarten teacher because I love teaching and I love little kids, but earning a music major was my fastest way out of college. And so I thought, well, I like little kids and I love the violin. I think I'll teach the violin to little kids. So I continued on with my education throughout the years, studying pedagogy, which of course is the art of teaching. And I absolutely loved teaching. Over the course of time, though, I started developing difficulties with my left hand. I had trouble, even in Orange County, where you would think you have access to absolutely everything. I had trouble finding the right doctor, and I can get into that story if you want me to. It was surprising to me the difficulty that I had. I ended up flying to Cleveland, Ohio, to meet with a neurologist there who's well known throughout the country for working with people like me. He diagnosed me with Task-Specific Focal Dystonia, which by the time I got there, I already knew what I had. I just needed him to confirm it. And he did. One of the things that he said was the treatments. He said, well, we can try Botox, which we all know is used to relax your, I don't know if it would be described as relaxing your muscles. People use it, cosmetically for their forehead or their eyes or whatever. But the dystonia causes involuntary movements and spasms. And so sometimes people will use Botox to try to curb the effects. And then the other thing he said was, I can give you a dose of Artane, which is used for Parkinson's patients. And he said, well, and he said, I'll start you with this particular dosage and we'll see how you tolerate it. I said, what do you mean by tolerate? He said, well, it can cause depression. Well, I'm sitting there after nearly a 30-year career of playing the violin. I can't play anymore. I don't say it out loud, but I'm nearly suicidal. And I think, you're going to give me a medication that causes depression? That's insane. So I didn't tell him that because the last thing I needed to do would be to be in Cleveland on a 72-hour hold. So I didn't say anything. I came home to California. I did my own research. The success with Botox and with Artane are extremely small. It's extremely rare for somebody to say recover from this condition. Even after using these medications and using Botox. And what I discovered was when people truly have success, any measure of success, whether they return to the stage or not, what they do is something we all know as grit. Recovering from this condition is like recovering from a stroke. It's somewhat more complicated because when you have a stroke, that part of your brain dies. When you have a task-specific dystonia, the part of my brain that controls playing the violin is misfiring. It's confused. So when I pick up a violin, my hand remembers, oh, I don't like doing this activity. And so I try to move one finger and another finger moves, or there's a spasm, there's a contraction, there's an inability to have a clear communication. The communication is slow. I found a teacher that I thought could help me. That's a whole nother story. We could probably make 5 podcasts out of this. I convinced him that he could help me, and I went for lessons. I put my hand up the violin, and my whole arm was in a tremor. It was shaking, and he took his big hand, about the size of a dinner plate. He took his big hand over and put it over my hand, and the tremor stopped. And he had never worked with anybody, with my condition. We were both shocked. We had no idea what we were doing. And that's where we started. I remember having to take off my shoes to even attempt any type of movement with my left hand because I couldn't balance in shoes and concentrate on moving my hand at the same time. It was the most bizarre situation I had ever encountered. It didn't seem real to me, and it's task specific. So I had no symptoms except being, if I tried to play the violin, the brain just remembers, I don't want to do this task anymore. And they think what happens is that people who develop the task-specific dystonia, it takes about 10 years for somebody who's doing a fine motor skill for hours per day. And one of the other most common situations is that it has to be under stress. And that's where the brain says, I don't want to do this. It's too stressful for me. And it starts to misfire. In sports, it's often known as the yips, YIPS. But for musicians, court reporters, surgeons, we call it task-specific focal dystonia. So I started with this teacher, and we started with my hand, finally relaxing. And then I tried to move a finger like this, and the whole thing started again. I found that I was perhaps holding my breath. I found that everything about what I thought about the violin, my mental attitude, my emotional attitude, if I was tired, if I was hungry, if I was standing, if I was distracted at all, it interrupted my concentration. It took me 4 months doing little tiny activities for 2 hours per day to gather up the skills to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. That was the first piece I ever played 35 years previous. So here I am in 2012, gathering up the skills to play this piece. Now, intellectually, I have it all in my mind, but I can't get my body to do it. So it took those 4 months. And at the end of September, I thought, this is ridiculous. How long is it going to take me to get to, some fancy concerto? And I stopped playing for about a month because I just couldn't imagine spending the amount of time that it would require. And then I thought to myself, okay, if I can put my finger on the string, if I can take it off, maybe I can play some other simple folk song. And so I tried it. And it was not as hard as learning to play Twinkle, but whatever different order my fingers would go in, there was an extra layer of difficulty. And that's what it took, was grit. Just standing there, sitting there, looking at my hand and thinking, how am I going to move that? And I would get it on the string, and then I didn't know how to take it off. Sometimes I would practice for 30 seconds and have to put it down because it was so exhausting emotionally. Sometimes it was just only a few seconds, and I was trying to do this task, and I had to put the violin down because the thought of holding onto the violin by the neck, smashing it against the hearth into little bits of pieces, and then setting it on fire was a daily thought.
Does it hurt when you're trying to move your fingers, or is it like a numbness?
There was the only pain involved was fighting against the symptoms. So, for example, I had developed some carpal tunnel and some nerve damage. As soon as I stopped fighting against the symptoms and I was breathing, or I allowed them to happen, or I didn't worry about them, those went away over time. So I no longer have the effects of nerve damage or carpal tunnel because I stopped fighting the tremors, and I learned to breathe and work through it. And I actually learned how to play really anything that I had played before, but it's extremely slow. The rhythm is not right. I'm not doing correct articulation with the bow because I don't have the concentration to do that. So I can demonstrate, say, for several seconds, but very slow. that's where I was at. That's where I was at, when I made progress. And I had those lessons with the teacher for 5 years. And for 5 years, it was my hope, it was my prayer to get my life back. I have determination. I have focus, which is precisely why I've made so much progress in my life in the first place. But I also knew it would be what would get me out of the mess I was in. And that's what it would require, would be that type of focus and determination to get it back. And after 5 years, I decided that wasn't how I wanted to live my life, because I had lost sight of other things that are good in my life, and perhaps lost sight of gratitude, because I saw myself as a violinist. I didn't see myself as a separate person. I found my value in, if I can't play the violin, then what am I? A nonprofit for students and youth orchestras. And so I have this identity, not just with myself, but with people in the community, that this is who she is. And if I'm not doing that, then who am I?
Well, Annette, one of the things that I've noticed with somebody with exceptional talents like you had is they expect that what you're really good at is also going to be something that you really enjoy, and that it's a release, it's fun, it's enjoyable. But when you can't do that one thing that you kind of built your identity and built your life on, not intentionally, you didn't want to, as a girl, I'm assuming, start out and say, I want to be something that I'm fantastic at, and that's what I'm going to build my life around. But as you mature and as you grow up, it becomes kind of an identity that you have. And when you can't do it, and it's just painful to even think about trying to do it, it's got to be very hard to explain to those people that, want to be involved with you because of your exceptional talent. So how did you deal with that when people would kind of try to bring you into their world, and you didn't want to tell them no, I'm assuming, but you also had to find a way to say no?
I was after the diagnosis, I was talking to an aunt, and I had only been doing the retraining for a couple of months. And she said, well, why don't you just teach the piano? I don't want to teach the piano. I didn't spend my life studying the piano. I don't love the piano. Piano's boring. You just push the key, which is, again, very naive, right? But my heart was in the violin. People would ask me at church, oh, can you play for this meeting? Can you demonstrate for the kids? Yeah, I can't really do that right now. I'm having some trouble with my left hand. About 2 years after the diagnosis, I wore a violin pendant to church. And a woman, at this point, I hadn't played in public in, a couple of years. A woman came up to me and she said, oh, I didn't know you played the violin. It was crushing, because I didn't distinguish myself as a person separate from someone who plays the violin. I remember my mom saying, well, you can only do the best you can. And I thought that sounded ridiculous. Now I don't, because now I'm healthier. I said, the best I can, that's not good enough. I'm a violinist. I can't play the violin. So after those, and really during those 5 years, but certainly after those 5 years, I needed a different identity. I needed to be something else, because if I have to be something. About a year and a half after I joined the gym for the first time in my life and hired a trainer, I was in the best shape of my life. It was fantastic, but I went 6 days a week and I just burned out those calories. And almost every time I was bawling my eyes out because I just had to burn some energy. Ultimately, if we speed forward, now I work full-time for Marriott International. What happened is sometime in 2017, I decided that I really needed to prove to myself that I was more than a violinist, more than a musician, more than someone involved with youth orchestras or anything music. So I told my family, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to get a real job. And I didn't care what it was. I could be opening the mail, which is actually what I ended up doing. I was driving down the 55 freeway. And over to my left, I saw a Marriott property. And I thought to myself, I'm going to work at Marriott. I wanted to work at a big company. I wanted to have a boss, get dressed, put on shoes, which at that point was significant because I couldn't wear shoes and play the violin at the same time because it just took too much energy I had to feel my feet centered on the ground. It was a very strange situation, but I wanted to have a boss, go to an office, get dressed up, do what I thought normal people did at jobs. So I went on the website and I found this part-time clerical assistant job. And I looked down at the list of things that you have to know how to do. And I thought, wow, I don't know how to do any of those things. But it's entry level. And if other people can do it, why can't I? So the only thing I had on my resume was being the founder and executive director of this nonprofit for youth orchestras. And you put it on paper, it looks pretty fancy. And of course, I had basic skills for Word and Excel, those types of things. So I applied for the job, and by some miracle, my resume was plucked out of the abyss. It took some time for the recruiter in Maryland to convince the local office to talk to me, but they did talk to me. And I walked into that office, and the moment I walked in there, I had this overwhelming feeling of, you belong here. And I walked into that interview with these two women, and I thought, okay, Annette, you're going to use your talents. You're really good at talking. You're going to convince these two women that you belong here. I found the interview process actually to be quite simple because they just ask you questions about yourself. And I can talk about myself all day. Just wave the white flag, tell me when you want me to stop. And it was really rather enjoyable. They're very nice women, and one of them did not want to hire me because I didn't have experience. The other one later told me, when I asked her, why did you hire me? She said, well, you just seem so confident. So I got this part-time clerical position, the hardest thing I've ever done at 50 something, actually at 50 at that time, to work with people I didn't choose myself, to work with new computer programs, to learn a whole new industry. I was working at a corporate office, a regional office for Marriott. And I just loved it there. It was part-time. It was fantastic distraction from music. And I wasn't anticipating working there full-time. They weren't paying me enough to make that reasonable. So I worked there from February of 18 to the spring of 2020, and I was furloughed. I was absolutely devastated. I thought my position would be eliminated, and it was. I was offered what they call the voluntary transition program. That means you agree to resign and they give you a bunch of money. So I decided to do that just to be practical. But it was a smart thing to do because they eliminated my position. And that was in August of 2020. About 3 weeks later, my boss texted me and said, hey, Annette, there's this full-time position back in admin, but it's, a level up. And would you like to apply for it? And at that point, as a violin teacher, I had been teaching on Zoom, which I found to be 100% completely intolerable. And I decided this is my chance to retire from teaching. And I applied for the job. I took the interviews. At the time, I didn't know I was the only person they were interviewing. They knew that I was completely gutted, devastated from not working at the office. I was offered the position, and I decided to retire from teaching. And I look back at those 30 years of teaching with just absolute gratitude. People ask me now if I miss teaching, and sometimes I'm hesitant to tell them I don't. I just don't. I love people and I love the kids. I don't miss running a business out of my house. I don't miss being in charge of all those kids' lives and their competitions and their auditions for various things. I've learned to be grateful for the life I had, and now I'm learning all kinds of new things at the same office that I had been working at, and I absolutely love it. And I'm still running my nonprofit, and that's my little bit of exposure to the musical world, but I do entirely admin. I have a conductor who conducts the orchestras for me. I have a couple of assistants, the string coaches, they help the kids, and I just do admin, and I consider them to be my people. I love those kids. We have auditions coming up on August 21st, and it's my favorite day of the year. All those kids and all their passion and dedication. These are the kids that are like me, who on a Saturday morning, they're willing to come to a youth orchestra. Their parents are paying tuition and they're auditioning for this group. They are the cream of the crop. And I'm just thrilled to still be around my people.
That's awesome. And it's fun to see. I love in our previous conversation to hear your story about transitioning away from coaching and into your work with Marriott. One of the things that I wanted to ask you when you were talking about when you made that decision to join the corporate world, what precipitated that decision? Because I know a lot of people that are, they've followed their passion down the road as far as they think that it can go, and they realize I've got to do something, and a lot of times it's something completely different. But can you kind of give us a little bit of, I mean, obviously there was a ton of frustration there, but what precipitated that decision? Look, I gotta do something completely different.
I had not, by 2017, I hadn't performed in public in probably 7 years. And there was a realization that I was never going to be able to keep up in an orchestra again. And even playing a solo, the communication to my left hand is just not reliable enough. And if there's any amount of stress or even adrenaline, excitement that comes from giving a performance for people, I don't have the neural pathways to be in control of what my left hand is going to do. So I knew that it just wasn't an option for me anymore. And then for several years, it was exhausting to teach something that I could no longer do anymore. I was constantly doing workarounds. And during all these lessons, thinking, how am I going to teach this? How am I going to demonstrate this to get my message across? And then not being able to play duets with the students anymore. It was emotionally and mentally exhausting. I think that a main reason for getting that part-time job was just to not necessarily to even work towards a full-time job. I just had to get out of the house and literally prove to myself that I was more than my ability to play the violin or do something music related. I didn't want to be in charge of anything. I just wanted to get out of the house and go somewhere and do any kind of mundane task. And I do admin now. I do a lot of correspondence, a lot of finance. I'm not in charge. I don't want to be in charge. I'm in charge of my own tasks, and my boss leaves me alone because I do my best when you just tell me what to do and I'll go and do it and leave me alone. That was my main motivation. I just wanted to know what it was like to work for somebody else and to not have any type of music pressure at all. Does that answer your question?
That's great. That's great. And it's as we talk to people, it's a lot more common than I would have expected, just because, but it's that fascinating transition when you can't do what you love. It's almost like you just want to be done with it, that it's just not part of you anymore. And you want to, in some ways, disassociate from that.
There was a time when, and I would say it was in 2017, that I literally went through a feeling of mourning. And for me, it was mourning a death in exactly the same way that I have mourned the death of people. That the part of my life that played the violin is now gone. It's dead. And when you first lose someone, or you lose something that's important to you, and when I say something, I don't mean to be shallow and say, like, we move from that house, or I don't have my boat anymore. I'm talking about, something I experienced, or you lose a person. It was the exact same process. There was frustration and anger and fear, and circling around to looking at my life and being grateful. There was, near the end, I believe it was the spring of 2017, I came across a video of Helen Keller and Anne Sullivan. They were describing how Helen learned to speak like she describes with her mouth. She would take her hand or her fingers and touch various parts of Anne's face, say, touch her nose and feel the nasal of like an N. In this video, Helen is speaking and you can't understand a word that she's saying. And so Anne translates for her. I had this epiphany listening to these two women. It was the most bizarre experience. A thought popped into my head. This is perfect. And I immediately thought, that's ridiculous, Annette. There's nothing perfect about this. You can't understand a word she's saying. And it occurred to me that I was saying it's perfect in effort and tenacity and passion, determination. And I realized at that moment that what I had done with the violin, after 5 years of trying to retrain, it was enough. And I'm not a quitter, because I don't circle around and get to where I was, because quite frankly, I'm never going to get to where I was. And I've realized at this point, I don't want the life that I had, because I have learned a level of concentration and patience, empathy for myself and other people that I never knew existed. I've learned a level of relaxation in my body and mentally and emotionally that I had no idea that existed. I'm a much better person for having experienced what I did, and I wouldn't trade it. I realized after watching that video that I'm enough. I'm enough as a person, and whatever I decide to do, whether it be musical or anything I decide to do. If I want to open envelopes at Marriott, that's what I'm going to do. And I am enough.
You've used the word gratitude several times during this conversation. And it's fascinating how many people aren't grateful for things. And even people that are grateful, I feel like, don't take the time on a regular basis to really look at their life and be grateful for what they have. And I think it's neat that you've gone from being a professional violinist and you've had this transition into this new life, and you've taught yourself, I think, the importance of gratitude. Like, I think sometimes the struggles that we have in life almost in a way force you to be grateful or not. But talking to a lot of people over the years about things, related to this, it's really, really important. Like, if you can't be grateful for what you have, including the challenges, including, the different moments of your life, people struggle that aren't grateful. And you've used that word several times. I wanted to point that out because I think it's a critical step to being fulfilled in life, is being grateful for the moments that you have. Like, you were a professional violinist. That's great. Life, for whatever reason, life kind of shifted into a new area, and you can be grateful for that also. It's just, for each moment of your life, there's a reason to be grateful.
Well, to be fair, I'd like to emphasize that it took me 5 years
right.
to learn to be grateful. During that time, I did learn to some level, because I would say, learn to move my finger. And I think, that's fantastic. That's wonderful. And previously in my life, why would I ever think that moving my finger is really wonderful? In the summer of 2020, when I was furloughed and I didn't have this wonderful place to go to at the Marriott office, I spent the good part of summer of 2020 in therapy with the exact same thoughts. I go into her office and I said, if I can't go, if I'm not working, who am I? I love working. Because when I was working part-time at Marriott, I was teaching part-time, like 20 hours a week, violin. I was running my nonprofit. I was working at Marriott for 20 hours a week. You can add up the numbers. I love working. And Marriott was cut off, and that was my safe place to be. And I fell back into the same trap. If I'm not working, who am I? I don't know who I am. And being a religious person, you feel like hitting me on the head. Like, hello, Annette, child of God. Let's try that. And yeah, but whatever. And I couldn't see through it. I couldn't get up in the morning. I couldn't sleep at night. I couldn't eat. I'm pretty sure they call that depression. So I think it's a person. I struggle. I love working and I love producing things. I love doing things. And it perhaps may be something I need to remind myself of the rest of my life. I'm better at it. But absolutely, gratitude is how I have made progress in my life, especially from having such a big loss, especially from 2012.
Given what you've learned, the experiences you've been through, let's say that, I don't know, you got in an accident and your hands were crushed and you can't use your hands anymore. Another major transition for Annette. How do you think it would take you as long to transition into whatever the next phase is? Or do you think it would be quicker?
I would hope not, because I think intellectually I can look back and I can say, okay, you did this one other time before. And people have asked me, how does a professional violinist go from playing the violin to working at a regional corporate office for Marriott? How does that happen? I said, well, let me tell you my story. I would hope that I could. And my life isn't perfect now. Every day I wake up and I've got some big trial or something's happening. And I do at this point remind myself, look what you've done already. So intellectually, I'm in a better place. Not to mention the fact my therapist says I'm at high functioning. So there's that too. And I have really come to appreciate having a therapist and being able to just take all of my garbage and dump it over at her office. And I use those very words. I said, I'm here to dump my stuff. You figure it out. I can't deal with this stuff anymore. You figure it out. You tell me what to do. You're going to experience some horrible loss. And I'm not wishing that on other people. But I believe that it happens to teach us that we are capable of more than we can possibly imagine. And we, as a result, have insight to offer people. People have to decide what their own path is. I happen to have the opportunity to make a drastic change. I wouldn't call it luck because I've worked really, really hard to prove myself in a new world, in a corporate world. Definitely just giving someone space to say what they're feeling and to only offer advice if it's asked for. I was given advice when I didn't ask for it. And I appreciated that they were trying to help me and give me options, but I wasn't ready to hear it. So I would listen and I would meet somebody where they are. Bring what you have, come as you are.
Well, Annette, I think that last comment was a great way to wrap things up, and great advice for anybody that's kind of going through a challenging time.
Well, we really appreciate you talking to us, Annette. I know a lot of people are going to get valuable lessons out of this. And we're just grateful that you're willing to come on here and talk to us.
Well, it was really my pleasure and always gratifying to help other people. If my story can help somebody to have courage to face whatever they're doing, then that's what we're all here for.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Passion to Poison. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review. Also tell your friends to subscribe as well.